I think I speak for myself and the rest of the Mirai team, as well as I'm sure our Tier 1, Tier 2, Tier 3 members online, and saying, so good to be back at BSOP tonight. So we're happy to be here. We've missed you, our family in the crowd. And we've got a very, very exciting program tonight, at least exciting for me. I'm going to geek out on you a little bit here, okay? All right. Let's do it. Okay. And the season is fall. What do we do in the fall? What is fall all about for bonsai? Fertilize. Growing. What's growing? Vascular tissue, roots, growing. All right, let's talk about it. Okay, so when we start getting into fall physiology, one of the things about bonsai that is such a bummer over the course of time is we've really dubbed down and diluted and taken all of the nuance out of bonsai, or maybe we didn't have it and we're just starting to learn it. But we have to understand fall, super mega season for us to accomplish things with our trees. But we have to understand the mechanisms, right? Fall is about nuance. It's about nuance, all right? So here's what we're going to be continually referring to tonight when we're talking about fall work. What are we trying to accomplish? Okay, this is going to become the mantra of fall. What are we trying to accomplish, all right? So when we say we're achieving vascular growth at this time of year, what does that mean? Why would a tree be producing vascular growth? Okay, so we're storing carbohydrates potentially. Storing carbohydrates or sugars and starches for what? Spring growth, for dormancy. How does that impact dormancy? Antifreeze. Okay, so it lowers the temperature at which the water inside of the plant freezes, right? So this is an important point. What else is happening right now that's triggering vascular growth as opposed to foliar growth? What's happening to the days? Shorter days. What's happening to the temperature? Cooler temperature. The plant is saying right now, if I put out a bunch of solar panels because I'm going to photosynthesize with shorter days and a lower amount of metabolic activity, that's a smart investment, right? Not, right? So we're going to store up all of our resources. We put out these solar panels. We're reaccumulating this energy. We're going to tuck these in. These are going to help us get through winter, particularly if it's really cold. But really, what are all of those stored sugars and starches going to be doing? For what? Waiting for spring to produce more solar panels, right? So it's this beautiful system. I'm going to produce solar panels. I'm going to accumulate energy. All of that energy that I accumulate from those solar panels is going to create more vascular tissue. That vascular tissue is for the growth next year that's being created, right? So a tree doesn't create solar panels and then try as hard as it can to build up all of the highways to move water and sugar and starches, right? That would be silly. Trees don't have credit cards. They can't function in that fashion. So they create right now all of the vascular tissue that allows them to produce the growth next season. So when we start talking about fall physiology and the decisions that we're making, we can't just be thinking about what do we want now. We can't just be thinking about winter hardiness. We've got to be thinking about what do we want next spring to be happening, right? What are we trying to accomplish? So I've got several trees that we're going to be dialing in. What do we want to accomplish, okay? But first, let's just understand, where are those sugars and starches that we're saying are being stored? Where are they being stored? Where does that happen? Does that happen in the foliage? Happens in the roots? Does it happen in the branches? Does it happen in the trunk? Can we say that all tissue that this plant has is experiencing a hyperloading of sugars and starches? I think that's very safe to say, right? What would be exceptions to hyperloading of sugars and starches across the entire plant? Okay, maybe last year's foliage, or what about trees that shed their foliage every year? Would they be loading sugars and starches into the foliar mass of the tree? No, this is a different mechanism for deciduous versus conifer, right? So we've got to be thinking differently now when we're looking at what do we do at this time of year? How do we maximize our tree? How do we set them up for success next year based on what we want to accomplish? What are we dealing with, all right? So I brought up a juniper for the first big piece, and I'm going to come back to physiology as we kind of work through this system tonight. I wanted to start with the juniper. Now, what are some things we could be doing to juniper right now? Is this a good time to style? No. Why? Okay, less foliage for the plant to make sugars and carbohydrates. Interesting point that you make there. Very interesting point. Do we have a mic tonight? Yeah? Okay. So when you guys give out a really solid quality answer, you're going to have to put the microphone to your lips, and everybody online is going to hear you, people from all over the world. That's all part of being in the BSOP experience with Bonsai Mirai, okay? So maybe it's not a good time if we're reducing heavy amounts of foliage, right? But what is happening physiologically again with the plant? What is it doing? It's growing. It's growing in the vascular tissue. Well, what if we break it? Would that have a better chance to heal if it's growing it? Yes, exactly, right? This is the number 2 time of year to be doing heavy structural work on a lot of our junipers, okay? So this is a really great season. Now, there's something else that's happening here. We've got sugars and starches moving down through this tree. Notice that this living vein is yet to be touched, right? It has yet to be cleaned. It's not that red color that we see in the pictures. Why is it not? What's happening here? This is a big part of juniper work at this time of the year. We start looking at our trees that are showing us positive foliar production, right? Positive foliar production means they're photosynthesizing. The roots have recovered if we're adding foliage mass, right? Because the roots, in order for the tree to grow, I have enough to sustain what I already had, either when I was collected or from any work that's been happening recently, right? And if I've got new growth, I have enough to add. So I have enough to sustain and add is what this is telling me as a tree is growing. This is speaking bonsai, right? So we're going to be translating bonsai tonight. If I have enough to sustain and add, it means that I'm accumulating resources and expanding my vascular system. What is one of the biggest reasons that we would clean the live vein on a juniper? Borers. Identification of borers. Now, this is something that I take for granted because at Mr. Kimura's in Japan, I probably cleaned 2,000 or 3,000 junipers in the 6 years I was there. For whatever reason, that job fell on me. I did all of the needle junipers, I did all of the live vein work, and I did all the deadwood painting, right? That lasted for 5.5 of my 6 years. So I take this for granted. I've never seen somebody actually teach how to clean a live vein. How deep do we go? What are we looking for? What could be a problem? And tonight, because we've got all of these sugars and starches moving through this live vein, this is when borers start to really establish themselves, right? Anybody have any idea when borers are actually laid, the eggs are laid that turn into the larvae that feed on the tree? Okay, so this is happening end of May, June, and through into July. You're exactly right, Alan, into July. So when we're looking at that, we're saying, listen, the larvae are there. They're starting to grow. They're starting to feed right now. We have an influx of resources moving through this living tissue. This is when they start to become big, super califragilistic, absolutely destructive insects. So this is a perfect time of year. The live vein is solidified to come back in and clean this live vein. How far do we go? How do we do it? Okay? I've got this very beautiful tool here for all of you guys online, right? This is a gouge. This is a $15, $20 6-piece set from Harbor Freight or woodworker.com. I don't know if that's even a website, but right? Anybody has these. They're a very common tool, right? The duller, the better. You never hear me say that about any other tool. The duller, the better, right? Because the last thing that we want to do is be getting down into that tissue that's producing all of those sugars and starches, right? But notice how I have all of these layers on this here. Notice those exterior layers. This is old, sloughing off living tissue, right? And the tree uses this to be protecting itself from excessive what? What is the tree, what is the purpose of bark? Heat. Protection from what? Insects, maybe? Sun, weather, fire. Okay, so bark is this thing that protects the tree from excessive moisture loss. Right? Excessive moisture loss. All of those things. Yes. The answer is yes, you're all correct. It protects it from that, right? So if we first collect a tree out of the mountains, or we dig a tree out of the field, or we have a tree whose root system and foliar mass, that connection has been compromised, do we want to be cleaning a living vein? No. Why not? Okay, it needs to recover because we just said that if we reduce this living vein, or excuse me, not reduce it, but we reduce that bark mass, we automatically open up to more moisture loss as that water's moving from the roots to the foliar mass, okay? But when the tree starts growing, the tree is telling us, I have enough to sustain and add. That means that the connection from the root system to the foliar mass has been firmly established, and now we can come back in and start to do some of the work because once it has enough to sustain and add, we get a lot more sugars and starches moving through this system, which is a lot more edible for these very destructive, boring larvae, right? So understanding that as you guys are dealing with trees, I can't just come here and say, hey guys, you gotta clean the live vein on your junipers. I have to come here and say, we clean the live vein on the junipers. Why? Right? One of the functional aspects is for identification of insects. Why else do we clean the live vein on junipers? Okay, so we start to, absolutely, right? It looks nice. We maximize the aesthetics, right? So we're accentuating that contrast between living and dead. Okay, now notice as I'm removing this bark from this section, obviously we've got deadwood. And this is an interesting thing to understand about junipers. Notice how weathered this portion of deadwood is. Do you guys see that? I'm going to rotate that for you. Notice how weathered that is, right? You think that's the oldest part of the deadwood? Makes sense, right? If it's the oldest part of the deadwood, it would probably have had the longest chance to deteriorate via the natural action of the environment, right? And then as you move away from this, notice how this progressively gets smoother and smoother or less weathered as you move away from it in both directions. You guys see that? Okay, so there's a few little lessons to be taken from this. Deadwood is a dynamic thing, right? Deadwood is always changing. It's always weathering more, and there's always more deadwood being added to the tree because the live vein is also a dynamic organism on this tree, okay? So the live vein is always receding from the deadwood. It's always continuing to expand with the addition of new growth. So we're always getting this increasing amount of deadwood, but we understand the oldest part is the most weathered. As we move away from the oldest part, we get less and less weathered. So when we see this live vein starting to recede from where we had living tissue that's now becoming dead, for that to be smooth is actually a very natural part of the entire process. You understand that? Most of us are always trying to create extremely weathered-looking deadwood across the entire circumference of our trunk and our tree. Is that, yeah? We're always thinking, we got to make it weathered. Where's the grain? What's this? Okay? But there's a progression to deadwood that makes it look natural, and this is a perfect indication of that. So as I'm working in this area and I'm just removing this bark, I start to find more and more of that deadwood, right? And I notice that I don't have any living vein. Now, I haven't shown you guys how I identify tapping into living vein because I haven't hit it yet. And as we start to reduce this bark mass, because we're trying to identify these borers, because at this time of year we've got sugars and starches moving through this that are feeding those larvae, I'm continuing to use these differing plates of bark. Do you guys see these layers here that I'm just kind of peeling off? I'm just using those layers as indicators that I haven't gone deep enough, okay? Every time I have another layer, I've got to go a little bit deeper, a little bit deeper, a little bit deeper, okay? And I'm looking for those layers. Now, how do I know when I've gone deep enough? I'm going to take a little bit of a plunge into this live vein right here, and I'm going to see if we can identify where the depth that the living tissue occurs at. Yep. Hang on, microphone. You gotta get movie star up in here.
So do you just assume that there are borers there? Do you see them? How big are they?
Right.
What do they look like?
Right. Do we just assume there are borers? Do we see them? Do we know what they look like? This is the problem with borers. Everybody thinks when you have a borer, you're gonna see a hole, and you're gonna see sap, and you're gonna see an indication, right? But we only see that when the borer leaves, right? When the borer enters, when that beetle lays that egg in the crevice of this very craggly bark, which is an extremely safe place to lay an egg if you want it to hatch undisturbed, right? When it lays that egg and that larva starts feeding on that really soft, nutrient-rich tissue, we can't see what's happening there because it's so small at that point in time, right? And this is why borers are so incredibly destructive. So cleaning the live vein is a very proactive way of stopping that hole that we see and that sap that we see oozing from happening, because once that happens, our tree's already dead, right? It's already died. And then we see 3 or 4 months later, the foliage starts to change color, and we think, oh no, it happened. I lost something. I got to spray it. I got to get a syringe. I got to get in there and do it, but we're already too late, right? So this time of year, right now in fall, right, as we work through this BSOP thing, this is a full cycle of knowledge about bonsai over the course of a calendar year, correct? I've never seen anybody talk about cleaning the live vein on a juniper, and it's one of the most paramount things that we do in bonsai. Because if we don't do it, if we don't do that, right? Some people say, I like the bark. I don't really care about deadwood. Too much deadwood. People are too high on deadwood, right? I don't know about that, right? Because there's a function to this, okay? And also accentuating that contrast, right? Showing you guys this transition from weathered to old, newer, newest, right? This is also a part of showing the progression of a juniper as a living organism or a species of tree, okay? So this is a multifaceted thing. Now, I took a little bit of a dive in here, and Ricardo's going to get in nice and close here to show you guys this color change. I think it'll probably be difficult to show you guys. I might give you a little bit of a tilt up here. Can you guys see that really white color compared to the brown? That's a really small spot, I know that, right? That's hardcore. If in doubt, this stream will be online. You guys can come back and check that out. Ricardo, can you see that? Okay. This is the living tissue. So I've gone down through probably close to an 1/8 inch of bark to get to that living tissue. Now, once I find that living tissue, I know I've established, okay, at that level, that's my living vein. I can take the surrounding bark around down to that, and now anywhere where I find ridges at that level that I've just established, I can come back in with my tool, and I can be reducing that bark so that I make sure that I'm not leaving enough space under that bark for that borer larva to be feeding, okay? If we're too conservative in this operation, a borer larva only needs a few millimeters to be able to hide underneath that layer of bark and feed on that phloem and that cambial layer with all of those sugars and starches, okay? So at this point in time in the year, we're doing this, getting down as close as we can to the living tissue without exposing a ton of living tissue, a few nicks and scratches here. This will be red by tomorrow and you won't know that it happened, okay? Any questions about the living vein cleaning process? So we're going to do this from the base of the tree all the way up to the top of the tree, and we're even going to come out onto these branches and clean off all of this flaking bark. And this is going to help us set this tree up because it's showing us I've got enough to sustain and add. This avenue is free to be cleaned of that so we can identify those insects feeding on it. We got a question right here. Okay? Big part of our process at this time of year. And again, speak bonsai to me. Why now? Why now? Why is this important now? Okay, we know the borers are being laid in May, June, or July. We know that sugars and starches are being loaded into the live vein now, right? Borers feeding on the sugars and starches. This is the optimal time of year for those insects to be maximizing their efforts inside of the tree. Does that make sense? Yeah? What do you got?
If you see borers now, is removing the bark sufficient to take care of the, will you see it?
So if you get down, that's a great question. Will you see it? If you get down to the layer where you see that white and you're hovering a few layers of bark above that as you're cleaning this, you will be opening up sections of the bark if there are larvae in there where you will be exposing the larvae and you'll be able to see them and physically remove them. Okay? Now, one of the big questions most people have is there a pesticide or a chemical that can eradicate borers? There's a question back there with Alan too, Brandon. Is there a chemical that can, that was the question. Is there a chemical that can eradicate borers? No, there's not. There's not.
Ryan,
There's not.
whoa, I'm loud. Gary's wondering if you like rugged bark, how do you deal with them?
Okay. Is this, Ryan, we need to slow down?
No,
Oh,
I'm
okay.
just trying to
Okay, cool.
incorporate.
Okay, all right, we'll come back to that, right?
Okay.
No chemical that can get into it. Why not? Why not? We say systemic. Systemic feels like it's something that we should really like. It sounds like it's something that's good. It gets taken up by the tree. They told me that it would kill insects that are feeding. Why does systemic not work? They don't go into the xylem, right? Absolutely. Very interesting. Systemic insecticides don't go into the xylem. Or no, excuse me. Systemic insecticides are carried in the xylem. Borers are feeding on the phloem and the cambium outside of it, right? Which is why this layer, this very thin layer that's keeping this tree alive, the connection of the foliage feeding the root system and the growth of all this vascular tissue, exactly what's happening right now, is so important, okay? Identification is the only way that we can accurately remove borers. Now, if we're dealing with a deciduous tree, moving so much more water through the tree, now systemic insecticides have a lot more efficacy, okay? Because there's a lot more liquid, a lot more resources, carrying a lot more content of the chemical in a less dilute ratio through that vascular system, okay? So I want to come back to Gary on the live stream in terms of Gary, rough bark trees. What did he ask? Why do I clean them?
No, if you like having rough bark, how do you deal with them?
I mean, I guess if you like having rough bark and it's worth the roll of the dice, then you just let them go. I don't know any other way, you know, and this is a problem in Japan. I mean, at Mr. Kimura's, we would deal with this consistently every single year, right? Borers were a major problem. When we're throughout the western United States, we've got 19 native species of borers in the Pacific Northwest. All of them want your juniper. And we think that borers feed on unhealthy trees. Why, if you're an insect that's looking for nutrition to grow and reproduce, are you feeding on a weak tree? That's silly. That's like going to the buffet that's already been totally cashed out, right? You go to the tree that is pumping the most resources and you say, all right, I'm going to be a big beetle when I come out of here. That is the idea. So when we see this is like, okay, it's time to come back in and do this, right? And again, I want to reiterate, this operation, getting down to that point, understanding how we find that point, understanding that these layers of bark are telling us we're still not far enough. Once we establish that depth, we function at that layer just above that depth, and we're going to do this entire live vein at that layer so that we make sure that we've identified to the best of our capacity whether or not we have anything that's impacting our living vein. And the bonus is we get this beautiful contrast of living and dead that expands the aesthetic of junipers. What do you got?
Are borers specific to juniper?
No, borers are not specific to juniper. Borers exist everywhere. What's the biggest borer that's attacking the United States right now?
Is it throughout the entire United States?
Almost throughout the entire United States, moving rapidly everywhere, right? There's multiple ones. So there's the pine borer, right? We've got the Ips beetle that's attacking all the lodgepole pines. Now it's moving into pinyon pines, ponderosa pines, okay? We've got the, what did you say? Emerald ash borer, right? Emerald ash borer, moving from the East Coast across the Midwest, through the Rockies, now across the Rockies, starting to be apparent and present in the Pacific Northwest. What? You guys ever seen one of those? They're really beautiful. They look like a little scarab, right? Okay? So we've got borers from all over the country, all over the world, ascending on us. One of the biggest, most damaging borers came in on pallets from Japan long, long ago, right? The longhorn beetle. Yikes, right? Down in Los Angeles, the shot hole borer, wiping out almost all of the maples in Southern California. So you've got borers upon borers upon borers. Right? And when you guys look at the history of American forests, borers have largely been one of the biggest reasons for forest regeneration. Right? Deadwood, South Dakota. Deadwood, South Dakota used to be called Stumptown, just like Portland, because all of the trees were knocked down by borers. Right? The entire forest was killed with borers. 95% of lodgepole pine in the Continental Divide are dead because of borers. You got something online?
Yeah, Wayne was wondering specifically in the southeast.
In the southeastern United States? What type of borers are?
Or are they active? Is that something to worry about?
Borers are everywhere.
They're everywhere.
Borers are everywhere. There's no way to avoid it anymore.
And then Paul said, some people believe mothballs and their fumes at the base of the tree contained in clear bags will kill the larva. What do you think about that?
I think that sounds like a great idea. I don't know what to tell you. That's like, if you just sprinkle a little bit of salt on there and a few Hail Marys and I hope they die. I don't think so, right? I mean, and then you gotta avoid, well, how about we just clean the live vein? What do we just clean the live vein? Why is this so contested in bonsai? I don't understand it. It boggles my mind. It is an operation that has function and aesthetics. We've got 2 questions in here. Lee, what do you got?
Do you treat the Hinoki cypress the same way?
I have yet to hear of a species of borer that attacks the hinoki actively. That doesn't mean that there isn't one. I have not heard of that as becoming an issue, right?
So how do you avoid killing the tree in the process of stripping all the bark?
Okay, so this is a good question because, and when I first started, I was saying, what is this? Is bark alive or is bark dead, right? Now, this is dead. This is dead tissue. It's very interesting. So when we talk about trees and all of the points where growth occurs, do we know what those points are called as a general term for a point of growth in a tree? A meristem. A meristem. Now, there's 5 meristems inside of evolved tree, right? We've got the cambial layer, which is the vascular meristem. We've got the root meristem that generates root tips. We've got the foliar meristem, or the apical meristem, that produces foliar mass. We've got the fruiting and flowering meristem that creates fruits and flowers, obviously. And then we've got this other meristem. It's called the cork meristem, right? And the cork meristem is what gives us, on evolved trees, this really rugged, flaking bark. And the sole reason for the cork meristem is to produce a very protective layer over the vascular tissue that's transporting resources, right? So when we start to see these things happen, this is all dead. The cork meristem is the only meristem that gives rise to dead tissue, right? Dead tissue filled with all kinds of things that make it very hard and protective of the tissue inside of it, okay? The cork meristem is also what prevents a tree from backbudding as it forms over that younger tissue. So we say with a ponderosa pine, as a ponderosa pine grows, you've got this very gray, smooth, and you can see it getting a little more rugged, and then you see it turn into this black kind of craggly bark. And you say, what is the difference between this and this? Well, age. Okay, but age, what happens with age? The cork meristem starts to form with age. And as that cork meristem grows over that younger and younger tissue, any adventitious locations for new growth to occur are covered up by that meristem, never to be recovered. All right? Very interesting aspect of horticulture. Yeah, yes?
What about pines?
Pines in terms of borers?
Yes.
Big problem, huh? Now, there's a difference.
But you can't strip.
There's a difference between junipers and pines now. Pines, we will see sap with the larva feeding. And that is a very major difference between borers attacking a pine versus borers attacking a juniper. You will see it on a pine. You will see sap combined with the frass or the ground up wood particles that creates a real smoky, foggy color, right? It'll occur in mounds, and we'll be able to remove that, go in and find that larva. But junipers, that does not happen.
I've seen you do this on the stream before. Is this the time of year that you do it? Or can you do it in the spring also?
So there's a big difference between what I'm doing here versus what I did in the spring on the tree, right? Because I'm taking off the dead portion of tissue right now to try and find whether or not insects are feeding, knowing that this season is when they feed, right? Physiologically, sugars and starches moving is triggering this action and response by me, okay? In the springtime, if we want to reduce the portion that is still alive and shrink down the living tissue and expand the dead wood, that's what we're doing in the springtime. We don't necessarily want to be cleaning the bark in the spring if the live vein is very flexible and delicate, because we can accidentally strip the live vein and cause irreparable damage to the tree. And think about this. Borers aren't feeding at a point in time where you've got all the resources moving out to the foliage mass. It's at this time of year when all the resources are moving from the foliar mass to the production of vascular tissue that we see borers start to feed. Yep.
So if you have a juniper that has no deadwood, am I still supposed to be stripping the old bark off of the entire juniper?
I mean, not necessarily, but if you don't, you could have deadwood where you don't want it. And that's the idea right now. But I'm not saying go do this. I'm just saying, hey, listen, guys, this is a major part of junipers. Everybody wants to contest. Do we clean the live vein or don't we? Well, I like rough bark. Cool, like rough bark, right? You're rolling the dice, okay? What if my tree is really young, still attractive to borers? Maybe even more attractive to borers the younger they are because they're pumping more resources, right? What if I don't have deadwood? You could have deadwood, right? If we don't continue to maintain or pay attention to this aspect of junipers as a species at this time of year, okay?
So with all the deadwood you've pulled off and it's laying all over the floor and it's in your pot there, is there contamination? I mean, what if there are borers there?
Oh, you'll find them.
No, but I mean, is the bark all over the place harmless?
Harmless. So this bark is just dead tissue, right? The borers are going to be feeding on the living tissue. When I pull this bark off, if there's larvae in there feeding, it will be attached to the wood, feeding on the wood, and you will see it. It will be a little segmented worm. It'll be white. It'll contrast to the wood. You'll know it. So this stuff being here, if there were a larva in here feeding on this, you would absolutely see it, okay? And we actually, the spirit of doing this right now for you guys is to say, we're just now starting to see some of the branches that have had a little bit of borer damage from the earliest attack in the summer starting to change color now, and we're like, oh my gosh, we got to go in and do this, and we've found 2 out of 5 trees so far have had borers in them. Very healthy, beautiful, lush, growing, right? Half the trees are no longer because of this problem. So it makes sense to educate you guys physiologically. If the theme is fall physiology and we're focusing on vascular growth, and that means sugars and starches are being moved in to expand this tissue, this is the time that borers are gaining their most strength and consuming the most amount of resources, okay? Let me see if we got some questions online.
Yeah, we have a couple.
Okay.
Keith and Brian are wondering if you clean the live vein and the bark every year.
So I would say that's a really good question, and I would say for the most part, when we talk about live vein cleaning, this is a 2-year cycle, because one of the things, this is like the same thing as painting deadwood. A lot of people say, I like the gray of deadwood. I don't want to paint with 100% lime sulfur to preserve the deadwood. When you do the live vein, this is only temporary because this tree still grows. The court cambium is still present. The tree is still expanding tissue and adding vascular mass. So this is going to continue to expand, and we're going to have this bark again in 3, 4, 5 years if we don't touch it. Every 2 years you stay ahead of it, you can't accumulate enough thickness for larvae to exist underneath it. And again, I want to go back. Borers are laying their larvae in these craggly areas where they put their eggs, and they think their eggs have the best chance to not be seen, to hatch, and to be able to get inside of that living tissue for a tree that's showing I got a lot of resources moving through me, right? So if we're cleaning this off, we're automatically taking away the most attractive hotel for borer larvae, right? Because the beetle's like, too clean, got that dirty one right there. Boom, that's mine, right? That's where I'm putting my babies, okay? So if we know that, we can automatically deter borer larvae from being laid on our tree just by keeping our live vein clean. It's a very interesting situation here, and yet we still want to argue about it. It's crazy, okay? Any other questions from online?
Yeah, Bonsai Guy's wondering if you clean the same way on all junipers.
Clean the same way on all scale foliage junipers. Scale foliage junipers. And I have to confess, so scale foliage junipers, if we're talking about like a needle juniper, right, like a rigida, Mr. Kimura did not clean that way, so I don't clean that way. I haven't ever seen a borer infest a needle juniper, which I don't know if there's actually something that doesn't happen there that does happen with scale foliage junipers. I honestly don't have the science behind why I still haven't dug into that, but for the time being, scale junipers is all that I've engaged with.
Are the Sierra and Western scale junipers?
Sierra and Western are scale junipers.
All right, what about my alligator bark? Which
Scale juniper.
The big thing, though, is the bark. You want to leave the bark on.
Right, yeah. So this is what you and I have talked about a lot, right? Alligator junipers, the bark is what gives them their name. It's got that scaly alligator bark, and we said, I guess if we're cultivating alligator juniper, maybe we're going to have to roll the dice continuously as a bonsai, right? Now, it begs to ask the question, and you guys should be asking this yourselves, are there ways to prevent borers other than this, right? Okay, well, yeah, I wish we could see the eggs. I mean, you would have to be, that's like a needle in a haystack in all of this craggly bark, right? To find find a very few tiny eggs, right? But they make purple sticky cards. So say, for example, you guys start to have trees that have borers attacking your collection, and borer populations expand if the food source, just like any opportunistic organism, right? I got a lot of trees showing me I got enough to sustain and add. It's the time of year to party. Let's lay some eggs, let's do our thing, right? And we've got a bunch of these. We don't just have one, we got a bunch. This is a buffet, okay? We can put out purple sticky traps, which are very attractive to those insects. Now, if we're talking about aphids, if we're talking about whitefly, if we're talking about any sort of flying insect that could be feeding on the foliage mass or the sugars and starches, a yellow sticky trap is a very common thing to have in the horticultural industry, right? It allows you to trap, 1, the reproducing adults, 2, it gives you a population indicator, okay? For borers, purple sticky traps, right? Very easy way to understand. Number 1, do I have a borer issue? Number 2, can I eradicate some of the reproducing adults that are now exiting via the holes that we didn't find and laying new eggs on the craggly bark we haven't gotten to yet? Yes?
Do they have a natural predator you can unleash on them?
Yeah, there are a lot of, that's a really good question, natural predator. So there are certain species of borers, and every species of borers has a different reproductive cycle. There are certain species of borers, particularly in deciduous and fruiting trees, whose adults go back into the soil during the wintertime, come up into the living tissue and lay their eggs during the growing season, right? And so beneficial nematodes applied to the soil mass is a great way to control some species of deciduous fruiting and flowering borers. For the ones that attack our conifers, I don't actively know of a beneficial insect that would be predatory on the beetles because they're there and then they're gone. It's not like they live there, right? They sit there, they lay their eggs, and then they're gone again, right? Any other questions online?
Yeah, Paul's wondering if you could go through the borer life cycle.
The borer life cycle? No.
That's a Google question?
So, Paul, if we had a whole stream on boars, which could be an idea for the future,
Not a bad idea.
then we can talk about boars. I honestly,
I saw my first one yesterday. They're pretty funny looking.
they
Look like parasites.
such a bummer when you find them, but
Yeah.
also such a relief because you're like, all right, I got you, assuming that they haven't killed the
They're
tree
really
yet.
gross.
I would say that at Bonsai Mirai, we probably have 400 junipers, and we will lose 2 to 3 junipers a year to boars. This is a known percentage loss in the Pacific Northwest with these insects. We will lose a certain percentage of trees, right?
When it looks like that?
No, but can you maintain 400 of these with this? Oh, when it's this healthy?
They've eaten enough to do them.
Yeah, well, so think about this. If you create an air layer, and this will help you guys, okay? Because we're saying once you see these branches fading, we got a problem. Come back to the this, and I'm going to set this off to the side. We're going to be done with junipers after this, okay? When we create an air layer here, right, we're removing the phloem and we're removing the cambial layer, okay? And we have water that's moving up the stem of the tree, right? And so the production via this photosynthetic mass creates sugars and starches that accumulate at that point because we've eliminated the vascular tissue that conducts sugars and starches. We've eliminated the phloem, and we've also eliminated the cambial layer that allows scar tissue to heal around this area. So we've got water moving up, sugars and starches accumulating. We create the right condition for roots to grow with moss or with soil, and we have a successful air layer, okay? When we have a borer feeding on the phloem and the cambial layer, we don't see that if we're not cleaning our living vein. So they feed on that area. We still have water, and this is what Lee said. They're not consuming the xylem that's transporting water, right? So now you got water going up the trunk. You got all the sugars and starches accumulating at that area where the borers ate that living vein and disconnected that. And all of a sudden, 90 days later, which we know it takes 90 days for a tree to exhaust its resources in the roots and stop feeding water to that upper canopy, 90 days later, you see the branches die. This is how borer damage occurs. So by the time we see it, it's already been dead for 3 months, right? And that's a really interesting aspect of bonsai. No matter where you are in the world, borers exist, okay? Fall physiology, very important because we're seeing the movement of all of these resources right now. Here's the thing. Knowing is empowering because now you can do something about it, right? If you choose to, if you like rough bark, you've been warned.
Question, Ryan.
Yeah, what do you got?
Do you feel that these come in with your yamadori, or are they just in the area? And do you, like roses, a mass of roses will attract more pests?
Sure.
All of those questions.
Sure, yeah, all those questions. Do they come in on yamadori? Yamadori, unless it's extremely healthy tree, is probably not where the borers are coming in because, again, borers aren't going to lay their eggs on a buffet that's already been exhausted of food, right? They're going to lay their eggs on the tree that's growing the strongest with the most amount of resources. Okay? Now, when we talk about weak trees tend to send out pheromones for insects, this is very true. But when we're talking about these tiny trees in containerized culture, those borers want the healthiest tree they can possibly find. So it's actually after the tree gets healthy that the borers attack, which means they're native borers, right? And we have 19 native species here that they've documented, right? And does more of these attract more borers? I think so, right? So the more junipers you have, the more borers are you going to have to deal with? Maybe the correlation isn't there, but maybe it is. Maybe when you got 400 of them, you're going to have more borers, right? Could be. And I know that we deal with that, right? A buffet. Yeah. Hang on, wait. Mike.
Are certain junipers more susceptible?
Are certain junipers more susceptible? I can't honestly answer that. I don't know. That's a really good question. I'm going to do some research on that. That is a great question. All right. Sounds good. I'll meet you there. Okay. All right. Okay, I want to switch gears a little bit. Right? I want to move to deciduous trees. And there's a big reason for moving to deciduous trees right now. Now, what is the scope of work for deciduous trees in the fall? What do you guys do on your trees in the fall? Leave them alone. Leave them alone. That's one answer. Anybody do significant work on their deciduous trees in the fall? Yeah? Yeah, why? What do you do? Oh, potting. Okay, okay. Anybody else do significant work on deciduous trees in the fall? Wire, potentially wire. Why don't you do work on deciduous trees in the fall? This is an interesting topic of conversation. Why not? They can't recover. What can't they recover? What can't a deciduous tree recover in the fall? Can't recover the foliage. Wait, and why can't it just grow new leaves? Why can't a deciduous tree just grow new leaves? They do it at other times of the year. Why not now? Okay, so we got shorter daylight length, right? We've got cooler temperatures. We've got the tree saying, if I take all of the energy that I've been trying to accumulate all year long and I put it into new solar panels when I'm losing daylight length and I'm losing temperature that's stimulating metabolic activity, that's a horrible investment, right? That's a terrible investment. At this time of year, the last thing we want to be doing is pruning deciduous trees, right? So then why would I bring a deciduous tree and start pruning it for you guys? Redistribute the strength because it has abundance. Okay, I want you guys to speak bonsai to me. Okay? I want you to talk in my native tongue, right? What are we trying to accomplish? What are we trying to accomplish? Okay? That's the question we've got to be asking ourselves. What are we trying to accomplish? In the fall time of year, what are we trying to accomplish? I'm going to set this off to the side for a moment. So let's think about this. There are two different phases, right? If we just take broad brushstrokes of bonsai creation, two different phases. We've got development, and you guys have seen this. I actually brought this tree specifically for this discussion about how we handle fall growth. You guys have seen this tree not just once, but twice, right? Todd did this for spring growth management for you guys. We came back and we talked about the third pinching and growth direction and growth perpetuation. So you've seen this twice before. Now we have it here for a third stream. You're probably getting tired of it. We actually get to see something really cool happen tonight. We talk about development. We talk about refinement. Okay, refinement for the spruce was pinching. Right? Refinement for a deciduous tree may be partial defoliation. You guys have seen partial defoliation take place. We did that on an oak for you guys for the stream, okay? Now we've got this Zelkova here, right? And we're saying, why would we bring it at this point in time? Well, this tree has branches in two different stages of development. It's got some that are elongating and thickening for development. It's got some that are accumulating too much leaf mass if they're in refinement, right? And when we think about what's happening at this point in time, you have all of these solar panels created. They're consuming or accumulating a tremendous amount of sugar and starches, right? Those sugar and starches are creating what? Vascular tissue. Very good. Vascular tissue. Stay with me. Speak bonsai, okay? Solar panels, sugar starches, at this time of year, shorter daylight length, right? Lower temperatures, vascular tissue. But if you're refining a deciduous tree, do you want bigger, thicker growth all the time? Do you want bigger, thicker branches? Do you want bigger, thicker tips? Right? No. No. If we're in refinement, we want finer and finer growth. We want finer and finer ramification. Why did we do the partial defoliation several times over the course of the season? And then we get to this point in the fall and we say, oh my goodness, I can't touch my deciduous trees in the fall. I don't want to do that, right? But it depends on what we're trying to accomplish, right? So if we're in development, the last thing we want to be doing is pruning or reducing the foliage mass on the portions that we want to gain the most girth and the most thickness. But for all of those pieces or for those trees that we want to be creating finer and finer ramification, we want to be reducing the amount of sugars and starches that are moving through this plant material, we're going to be pruning the leaves down by 50 to 60%, right? Reducing the photosynthetic surface area, reducing the amount of sugars and starches that are being produced. And you see this happening, right? There are a lot of nurseries in Japan that will prune off all of the fingers of their Japanese maples at the end of August or early September, reducing the photosynthetic surface area, reducing the amount of sugars and starches that are contributing to the thickening of that twig that is holding that leaf mass, right? With Chinese quince, a very big, coarse, strong, masculine tree, 50 to 60%, reducing the amount of sugars and starches, reducing the thickness of that twig. But what else did we say is happening at this time of year? Sugars and starches are causing vascular growth, yes, but what else are they doing? Okay, banking for winter hardiness. Winter hardiness, okay? So we're loading, when we talk about that winter hardiness, we've got this cell. I brought light trees tonight just for this reason. We've got this cell, we've got this organ inside this cell called the vacuole, and the vacuole is where we store all of the water that keeps the cell turgid, okay? This is where all the sugars and starches are being dumped into right now. Oh, sugars. Oh, starches, right? And the temperature that that water freezes at right now is dropping. It would have frozen at 32 degrees. At this point in time, if we're just hyperloading all kinds of resources now, maybe it would crystallize and freeze at 25 degrees. And if we keep loading it up, maybe it'll crystallize and freeze at 15 degrees. And if we keep going 5, 0, -10, -20, so as we see all these species, right, we go to lower elevation species, coastal species. We get into deciduous trees. We get into pines and junipers. We get into spruce and larch and hemlock. All of these trees have differing levels of temperatures at which their cells freeze based on how many sugars and starches they dump in that little cell into that water and reduce that temperature, okay? We'll come back to you in just a sec. Hold that question. So when we start to look at this, right, if we're cutting off the surface area that creates sugars and starches, right? I want a finer twig here. Is that twig as winter hardy? Is that growth as winter hardy? No, no. And this is where you see the most refined bonsai being the most fragile and delicate to temperature extremes, right? And so you see the amount of detail in Japan that they're putting into their Japanese maples and their deciduous trees, and you see how painstakingly they're taking care of them in the wintertime. They're moving them here, and they're moving them here, and they're constructing this, and they're doing that, right? This is because we're walking the line of creating this very beautiful, refined replication of nature in miniature, and to do so, we're pushing the envelope of horticulture and the ability for the plant material to tolerate the natural environment that they're natively geared towards, but we're compromising that by changing their fall physiology, okay? So when I come in to this Zelkova and I say, you know what, I want this branch to be big and thick, the last thing I'm going to do is reduce foliage mass on that. But say, for example, I want this branch to stay very, very small and nice and fine. I can prune this back, and then I can cut these leaves in half, and I've decreased the amount of sugars moving through it, and that will stay a finer piece of ramification starting next season, but it's going to be more susceptible to freeze damage as a result of that decision, okay? Again, coming back to fall. Fall is about nuances, right? If we understand the nuances, we can accomplish a more and more refinable tree. If we don't understand the nuances, we can cause our trees to be highly susceptible to the worst possible damage just by doing things out of the act of not knowing, right? Tonight's going to be one of the best nights of bonsai you guys have had, because now you have this knowledge to take home and apply, okay? You had a question.
I'm sure that this is the wrong approach, but why are you not taking off those large branches that you know that you don't want? And that is reducing the sugar and starch load instead of cutting all the leaves that you're cutting now.
I love this. I love this. And now we're speaking bonsai, right? Okay, 2 reasons. Number 1, every single season that I've had this Zelkova, I've lost about 20% of the branches, right? But I've also been striving for refinement every single fall season, right? So this year I thought, what happens? Well, I have to replace the branches that I've lost, okay? So that's, and then I started thinking, what happens if I don't reduce the foliage mass as much on some of these stronger areas? Do I lose that branch? Are the ramification off of that branch? Are these finer guys more or less susceptible based on the strength of this twig? If the theory, in fact, is true, that sugars and starches lower the temperature at which water freezes, and this is how we protect a tree. So this tree is a big, large petri dish for me for this coming winter, and that's why, okay? Theo, hang on, microphone. So if I do enough of these, where I'm pruning these leaves in half and I'm decreasing sugars and starches, technically, I should see these die, technically. If I'm decreasing their winter hardiness and we have a legitimate Pacific Northwest winter, I should see these die. And technically, if I leave all of the sugars and starches, all of the photosynthetic area to allow sugar and starch production here, I should see these survive. This is the theory, right? This is what we're talking about? Okay. And you're saying, well, why would you be doing this and killing this? Well, I mean, I have more twigs up here than I need. I can sacrifice a couple of those. All right, Theo, what do you got?
Well, this might be a dumb question, but
No dumb questions.
what's the point of snipping the leaves in half if they're just gonna fall off anyways?
Right. Exactly, right? I know, like, hang on. Didn't you say it was deciduous and those are going to fall off? Absolutely, absolutely. Now, when are they going to fall off?
Yeah, like November.
Right, so we're in the 3rd week of September. We've got till the last week of October or 1st week of November. Have you watched how fast wire bites into a tree at this time of year? This is what we're watching. We're watching sugars and starches being loaded, creating vascular tissue, expanding the size of the cell as a result of all of this loading to increase winter hardiness. And we recognize that if we cut the leaves in half now, we've got 5 weeks of vascular productivity that we're either reducing or maintaining at a very high level. This is paramount to your understanding. This is a pivotal technique to understanding how we, number 1, refine, number 2, control winter hardiness, and number 3, how we make decisions about wintering this tree, when we do the work, how we do the work, why we do the work, and what we need to do to preserve that work after it's done in the fall time of year. Have you guys ever thought about fall like this? I didn't think so, right? This is an important class. If we had one season, one single season over our 4 seasons of the year, that we had to nail our activity in bonsai, this is it. If you fertilized one time in the season, this is it, right? If you control growth one time in the season, this is it. This is the most important season of bonsai practice, and it's never, ever discussed. It's crazy, right? Does that help? Was that dramatic enough? Awesome. What do you got, Brian?
Oh, this is a stupid question.
Speaking to the mic.
Besides the cobas, I've been treating like an elm. Just cutting back to 2. Cutting back to 2. Cutting back to 2. If I want it to grow more, I leave it 3 leaves. I guess it's refinement. Is that? Am I making a mistake with the Zacoba doing that?
If you want it to grow more, leaving more leaves, is that what you're asking me?
Just refining.
If you want to refine it,
get more ramification.
So if you want more ramification, partial defoliation is how you're going to get more ramification. So partial defoliation, we did that 30-40%, right? And then it grows again. We do that another 30-40%. 3-4 times a year, every flush you get is a finer and finer flush, right? Now you still have to prune the elongating pieces. You get 3-4 internodes out, you got to prune it back, otherwise it'll get thick again. But it's a matter of how do you induce that next flush of growth. It's not via the pruning, it's via the reduction and the tree expanding and responding again. And we reduce and it expands and responds again. This is how we get finer and finer growth, okay? So the pruning is just a single part of a bigger process of reducing and causing it to grow again, right? But at this time of year, not the technique we're applying, okay? We're past that point now.
Douglas is wondering about doing removing foliage and doing cutbacks on maples right now as they're turning color because they won't bleed. Does that weaken the tree to remove the resources before the leaves have fallen off?
I would say once the leaves cross the peak of their color change, then removal of the leaf is no longer impacting the health of the tree because the tree's already reabsorbed a lot of the pigmentation. That's the color change as the chlorophyll moves into this vacuole in the cell. We see the expression of other pigments such as carotenoids, et cetera, right? And so that's, once you see the peak of that color change, you can go ahead and remove the leaves, and pruning at that point in time for a Japanese maple that bleeds abnormally in the spring is an appropriate technique. Now, as opposed to working on fine ramification at this time of year, yeah, you can, but you also have a lot of sugars and starches that are stored in those twigs that are giving that winter hardiness, and you're removing some of that by pruning at this time of year. So big cuts, yes. Little cuts, maybe wait. And we're going to answer a few questions from the from online real quick while you guys are kind of getting settled, okay?
So Carrie says, is it a fact that you have 10 days after leaf drop on maples to do any pruning without bleeding?
Oh, Carrie, 10 days after leaf drop on maples to do the pruning. I don't know that anybody can give you a defined time frame because tree by tree, area by area, temperature at the time that the leaves fall off are all going to dictate those physiological responses. So I would say trying to establish some stamp 10 days or you're out. Not a good idea. When the leaves pass the peak of their color, pull them out, do that pruning then. You know that you're still within that realm of capacity to prune. Best advice I can give you on that.
Gary's wondering if working on a juniper this time of year reduces winter hardiness.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Think about this. If you guys work on a tree at this time of year, you're going to be probably removing foliage mass. Foliage mass creates sugars and starches. Sugars and starches increase winter hardiness. Working on a tree at this time of year decreases winter hardiness. Now the question is, when do we tip and cross that threshold where that tree is capable of tolerating the temperatures that are going to be presented to it unknown to us that winter season, right? And so if we remove a heavy amount of foliage mass, that would be a tree that maybe we look to greenhouse. If we know we're going to remove a heavy amount of foliage mass and we say is now really the right time, maybe we hold off and we do it next spring before the growth starts and we still have all of those energy stores, but we've got warmer temperatures, right? And this is where we start to be able to control and make decisions. When do we do what we do? Now it's based on physiology and not some person standing up here saying, hey, you guys, fall's a great time to do bonsai, right? And then some other demonstrator comes up here and says, never touch a tree in fall. This is the problem that we've had in bonsai today. What I want you guys to have is to say, should I be doing this work right now? I'm going to reduce a heavy amount of foliage. It's the fall season. What is happening in the fall season? I'm accumulating sugars and starches and expanding my vascular tissue. Great. If I'm going to leave this outside and I don't have a cold shelter, maybe I should wait till the spring. If I have a greenhouse or I'm not going to be reducing a heavy amount of foliage mass that are going to compromise the tree's winter hardiness, I'm going to do it now. That is such a more educated decision to be making, right? If you have the physiology behind you to inform that decision.
So Paul's wondering if you could go over again why heavy work on junipers at this time is recommended, but not on deciduous.
So junipers are an evergreen tree, right? We're adding vascular tissue right now, breaks, tears, stretching of the vascular system, lower temperatures, shorter day length, less environmental conditions pulling moisture out of the foliage. All of our resources going towards vascular production. You patch that damage quicker without a loss of water happening in the foliage mass. Awesome time to be working on junipers, pines, and coniferous species. Deciduous trees, on the other hand, right? Still creating that vascular tissue. We don't want to be removing that foliar mass. Maybe we don't want to be removing that foliar mass, right? We've had that conversation. What are you trying to accomplish? Not opportune time to be working on deciduous trees.
All right, let's dive back into it.
All right, let's do it. Okay. So I started this whole conversation about fall physiology out with the photosynthetic mass for a reason. I didn't want to clog all of the open spaces in our brain mass with fertilizer, right? Because the assumption, no, and this is real, right? Because we've all been told this is the, and I said this to you guys, this is the most important time of year. If you're going to fertilize once, now is it, right? But I said that after, so I hope we got the photosynthetic mass plugged in there first, right? And that fertilizer is like a glaze over kind of the meatloaf, okay? Because understanding the photosynthetic mass is where the information is. That's where the gems are that you guys got to take home. You take that, you stick that in your pocket. When you get home, unfold it and put it on your countertop and make sure that that stays really nice and neat, okay? Don't let that information go. You guys are online. Don't let that information go. Right now, the photosynthetic mass is what's creating the tissue for your bud push next year. It's also what's creating the sugars and starches that give you winter hardiness, okay? But we got to talk about fertilization because if we're expanding vascular tissue at this season, one of the questions that happened during the break right here was, well, if we're expanding vascular tissue and we're fertilizing heavily, but we're trying to refine a deciduous tree, isn't that counterintuitive? And the answer is yes. But we also started off this discussion saying, what are we trying to accomplish? Do you guys remember that? I had it right here. It was really beautiful. It was getting in my way. It was limiting my whiteboard. I should have left it. I knew I should have done that. What are we trying to accomplish? This is the question we ask ourselves at this time of year. We know that when we fertilize, the question is, what are we trying to accomplish? Okay? So when we fertilize, what are we trying to accomplish? When we're working in the fall, what are we trying to accomplish? So when we fertilize in the fall, what are we trying to accomplish? What are we trying to accomplish? Right? That's the equation. 1 + 1 = 2. Right? We've got to really think about that. If we want a more refined branch tip on our deciduous trees, we're going to be dubbing down the fertilizer, either in quantity, in timing, meaning maybe every 6 weeks as opposed to every 4, or maybe both, right? And in addition to that, if we want even finer ramification, we may be cutting that photosynthetic surface area in half. So to date, in terms of gas pedals for providing supplemental nutrition in your bonsai development, I've given you 2 for fertilizer: timing and quantity, right? I see what was happening here. I see what was happening. I was almost there. Did you see that? I was like halfway there. You got it? Okay. What are we trying to accomplish? So we have timing. We have quantity. And now we have something unrelated to fertilizer, which is photosynthetic mass. Okay? And we're going to say these are our gas pedals for fall growth. Okay? Now you're looking at your photosynthetic mass as an actual gas pedal for how much your tree grows. Because continue to follow me on this journey, right? You have a refined tree. We're saying maybe we don't fertilize as much because we're asking, what are we trying to accomplish? We're trying to accomplish a refined tree. We're not going to put as much on. We're not going to fertilize as frequently over the fall season. We want to refine it to the point that we're even going to cut down the photosynthetic mass, right? And what is the product? If we protect it over the winter, because we say now we've increased winter susceptibility to cold, what is the product for next spring's bud push? What is smaller bud push, shorter internodes. What we could quantify as weaker, right? And we can roll the dice and we can take all of the energy out of the tree. I'm not saying, hey guys, do this to all your trees. This is the answer to every fall solution for a refined deciduous tree. No, you can go too far. You can kill your bonsai tree this way, right? But if you know it, it's still a mechanism. Who here attended the Artisan's Cup? Raise them proudly. Thank you. All right. Did you guys see the defoliated beech? Did you see the defoliated beech from the Pacific Bonsai Museum? Maybe one of the best beech in North America, right? Absolutely fantastic. Prematurely defoliated for that exhibition. That exhibition was this coming weekend, right? 2 years ago, this coming weekend. We know that that beech wasn't dropping its leaves prior to that exhibition. Prematurely defoliated. What was the product the next year? Did anybody see the beech the year after the Artisan's Cup? Rich, you saw it? What was the product? It was late to emerge, and the leaves of that beech were about the size of a dime, right? About the size of a dime. Yes, sounds sexy, I know, right? And also, you should be looking at that and saying, is this tree gonna be okay? That's a very small photosynthetic surface area for a very large tree for that beech to have that big of leaves, right? That was a direct response to the amount of sugars and starches it had accumulated prior to that defoliation prematurely in the fall. Was it didn't have the energy to produce any more growth than that one flush of dime-sized leaves the next year. Now, Aaron, being a tremendous horticulturalist and a great curator at the Pacific Bonsai Museum, rolled the dice for the aesthetics and knew he could get away with it horticulturally, right? And now that tree this year, back to its normal size, okay? It wasn't pruned, wasn't defoliated, nothing happened to it after that exhibition. Now it's back to total health, right? This is where we're at, you guys. Being able to cultivate bonsai at that highest level means understanding each of these mechanisms, okay? So I'm gonna pull the tree up here. Like we said, we've worked on this several times before, and I bet you guys were waiting for me to tell you how you fertilize in the fall. Were you? You know by now we're not gonna do that, right? This is how you do bonsai? No, what are you trying to accomplish? That's the question, okay? Gosh. Okay, I want to jump into a little bit of aesthetics with you guys because we've focused so much on horticulture. We got to reward ourselves from time to time with an aesthetic discussion, okay? For the size of this trunk, this container, this tree, is the foliage mass in proportion or not? Is it a little bit heavy, bit large, right? So if any of you guys have seen the stream before on Mirai Live, we've taken several trees, and we have a mantra about this, right? You develop trees. There's a cycle of development that trees go through as bonsai, and we can't stop them from growing. One of my first teachers down in Southern California used to tell me that his instructor would tell him, if you fertilize it, it just means it grows, right? So don't fertilize it, right? And that was the theory for bonsai in its beginnings in North America, right? So we know this tree has to grow, it has to produce new growth every year. Otherwise, the old growth gets older, photosynthetically inefficient, stops growing at some point because it can't feed itself, right? Sugars and starch production stops, okay? So if it's growing and growing and growing, we set this beautiful structure. And you guys have been with me to set structure before. We've styled a lot of trees for BSOP. And then after that structure is set, we start to build those secondary pieces of ramification with all the growth, okay? And then on top of that secondary ramification, we produce that really fine tertiary ramification. Exactly what this discussion of refinement is, the creation of tertiary ramification. But after 2, 3, 4 years of tertiary ramification, the tree gets too big. And we lose the proportion that gives this tree its aesthetic value that made it something we wanted to work on, right? So when we get to this point, fall is an awesome time to be coming back in while this tree is storing up all of its resources and be doing reduction and pulling out some of these areas, these massive sizes, this over proportion compared to the features of the tree that give it value, knowing that the response to this activity next spring is going to be proportionally smaller growth. Oh, okay. Did anybody see the Ponderosa stream last week? This is thematically the entire concept behind a tree and a species whose needle, when we pull needle mass away, the needles that grow get longer. But if we wait until the fall season when that flush of growth has stopped growing, and we pull pieces away at that time, the resources stored over the course of that fall lead to shorter growth the following spring because we've pulled pieces away. We don't have as much of an accumulation of energy. Same thing with an Engelmann spruce that has a very hard time backbudding, okay? So if I had to ask you guys, and I'm gonna mark the front of this tree so you know where I want you to look at it from because it is not quite very apparent. I was gonna mark the front of this tree. Maybe I'll set a towel here, okay? You guys are supposed to be looking at this from right here, okay? Right there, believe it or not, believe it or not. So this thing has grown a lot, right? This has impaired our ability to see the trunk, the tree, the design, the branches, the movement, right? So then we've got to start thinking, okay, I'm going to come back in and prune. Now let me just ask you guys something. When we come back and we prune a tree that's overgrown its proportion, do we come back in and we prune like that, right? You can't, right? You can't, because if we try to prune this, if we think about this as a deciduous tree and we come back in and we say, oh, but I've got these interior buds, so I'm gonna cut that, and I'm gonna cut that back to 1, and I'm gonna cut that back to 1, and I'm gonna cut that back to 1, and I'm gonna cut that back to that interior, right? And we say, okay, this is gonna be healthy, right? There's a fine line between a conifer that hinges on the constant production of resources and the way that we're going to prune a deciduous tree where we can cut back to no growth or very limited amount of foliage at the right time of the year, in the right time of energy positive, and have it respond. A conifer has to continue to drive that energy forward. So we're going to take the evolution and the development of these pads that we have now, and we're going to remove entire chunks out of this tree. Right? We're going to take whole branches. Now, are we going to take them all the way off, or are we going to leave something behind? Have to leave something behind? Why do we have to leave something behind? Why would we want to leave something behind? What are we leaving behind? Something that's going to grow? Okay, I mean, I'm not saying we're going to defoliate the tree. Something behind, when I remove this chunk of growth, do I just cut that off? Or do I leave something behind? And what would you leave behind? Aesthetically, what is it that we value and insinuates age? Deadwood. Deadwood. What is it that's so valuable about deadwood? Tells a story of what? Of age. Tells a story of age. Cool. So when we're going to come in here and we're going to have evolved this tree to this point and we're going to regain the proportion and we're going to limit, are we going to cut all these branches off? No, we're going to leave some deadwood behind. And this, for you guys, In your bonsai practice, you're going to style a tree. You're going to evolve that shape over 2, 3, 4, 5 years, right? It's going to outgrow its proportion. You're going to look at it and you're say, I don't love this tree anymore. I don't know, something about it happened. I'm just out of love with it. That's an indicator for you guys. That's a timing mechanism that says, I got to change something about this. It's outgrown the proportion that made this tree so attractive when I first looked at that raw piece of stock, and I had to have it, right? And I spent way more money than my husband or my wife or my partner said I could, right? We got to get back to that point of infatuation and love. And we're going to pull big chunks out to get back to that proportion. So I'm going to pull some big chunks out of this tree. Do you guys have any suggestions of where I should be pulling big chunks out of this tree? Over here in the back, does this feels not good? Okay, what about this? Does this feel okay? Does this feel too far out?
No, that one branch is
Really fine? You guys aren't giving me much help. In the back, where's the back? Right back here?
There.
Back in here? So it feels to me like you guys are saying this needs to come off. Yeah? Yeah? All right, let's go. Anybody disagree with this? Not that one. Yeah. That joke is right up there with the guy that's breaking the twig as you're bending a branch in the back. I still love you, Roger. You can always glue it back on.
By reducing that in half, are you still going to keep big, long, large bottom branch?
I don't know. This is the process, right?
Yeah.
Can you ask that on that microphone, please?
Oh, so when you start cutting this thing back, are you going to keep the very large, lower cascading branch in order to keep that in size with the pot you've got it in?
I mean, we're going to have to make some decisions, right? So the reason that I wanted that asked on the stream is because once we start this process, and it does matter where you start it. Typically, we start the design from the bottom up, but sometimes there are those blaringly obvious pieces. We do not need that. We pull that piece out, and all of a sudden, it starts the cascading effect of renovating this design. So now we do that. I look at this. Okay, I'm going to show this to the stream. I look at this. It's sitting over this. It's struggling to function now. It's covering up a branch that I do feel has value. Now maybe this doesn't need to go or doesn't need to be here. This. Or does that feel more like it needs to be there? It does. It does. It does. You feel like this one needs to go? You guys all feel like this one needs to go? Ron? I'm not giving you guys enough love over here. Let me rotate towards you. Okay, so we're talking maybe this one needs to go, or I was even throwing out maybe this one needs to go. This one needs to go? Yeah? And this one needs to stay? Or this one needs to go and this one needs to stay? This is the most beautiful part of bonsai right here, right? Because if I gave this to every single one of you, we would have 374 different trees. That's what makes this so great, right? Now, some of you would go super far into left field. We'd have to rein you back in, right? Because it would just be, okay? And then some of you would be kind of out here at the tip, right? Yeah, not feeling super good about it. And then there's anywhere in between. We got a question back there. Let's see. What does Ryan think needs to go? There's a reason for this, and I'm going to explain it to you guys. So this is going to come back down to fundamentals of design, and you know, we're kind of, this is like a what do they call that? An initiation session on design, like push the penny across the basketball court with your nose, sort of a thing. Okay. What is interesting? Okay, what is the essence of this tree? What is it visually that gives this tree value? Okay, the cascade for sure, right? Is this tree masculine? Is it? Is it? Is this thickness, is this masculine, or does it have some feminine characteristics to it? Has some very feminine characteristics. But we've created a canopy around this that is entirely masculine. This is entirely masculine. Masculine is dense. Yeah. Get it. Yeah, get it. There you go. Thank you. Masculine is dense. Masculine is high needle count. Masculine is heavily ramified. Masculine is large foliar masses, right? This is fundamental design of masculine versus feminine. If I look at this as the creator and I say, I want more feminine, I've got to open up exposure to the lines. I've got to decrease the size of the foliar masses. I've got to decrease the quantity of the ramification. I've got to decrease the quantity of the secondary and tertiary. And all of a sudden, you're going to start to tease out those feminine elements of the design. Now, each one of us, you think this is masculine. I think this is feminine. You guys might be anywhere in between that. And this is the spectrum of bonsai design when we start talking about what branches do we remove to show what, to do what. But we've got to know what is it that we're trying to accomplish by the reduction in order to do it appropriately, right? So when I'm asking you guys, do I remove this one or this one? Well, this one is the one that actually gives you the most visibility to this wonderful curve. This is actually sitting at the point where it's framing that point of visibility. It's showing you that. It's forcing you to see there. It's creating that window for you. This is bonsai design with intention to show people what you as the creator want them to see, okay? So had I removed this and left this, you would have seen far less of the best parts of the tree. So when I rotated it and you guys went, we won. We won. That was a good decision, right? That meant that you guys saw something better than you saw before. That's good branch elimination, okay? Shall we keep going? Yes. Okay. Okay. So you're saying bottom one on this side. Oh, hang on. Doug, what do you got?
I was just curious if you could go deeper into, you just briefly mentioned starting at the bottom, and then you said that are glaring things and sort of how, when you're approaching the situation, just more detail on that.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. So typically when we design bonsai, right, when we're starting from a raw tree, the first branch that we set is generally that lowest branch, okay? Because once we establish that angle, that sets the structure for every angle to be constructed in our tree as we move up the tree, right? If we don't set that angle correctly, say for example our angle is here, the next branch is here, the next branch is here, the next branch is here. And this is how we get to a symmetrical canopy. But if we start to talk about bonsai as a production of age is reflected in asymmetry, right? Youth is reflected in symmetry. This is the most photosynthetically efficient. Or for a conifer, this is the most photosynthetically efficient. Well, nature doesn't really care how photosynthetically efficient this was because it just went, right? And then we have this tree left over, right? With this piece of deadwood, looks something like that. Yeah, that juniper. That is randomness of nature, right? It didn't care about photosynthetic efficiency, okay? If we just let that tree grow, though, it will grow back into that photosynthetically efficient shape. That's the most interesting thing, okay? So when we're here, and we're looking at this, and we're striving for that asymmetry, we start from the bottom, because we set that angle. That's what allows us to create an asymmetrical silhouette. When I approach a piece of material like this, you guys will notice we went back to symmetry. I just told you guys. That tree will naturally come back to symmetry. It will happen every time. When people talk about the cookie cutter shape, which I think is ridiculous and I want to discard, but we all understand the cookie cutter shape of Japanese bonsai, you are seeing symmetry reestablished as that tree evolves because that is what creates photosynthetic efficiency. And if we want to push that back into age, or we want to carry that tree forward in age, and we're talking about leaving behind remnants, which is going to be this piece of deadwood, to reestablish asymmetry, show what was there that is no longer, and re-achieve that appearance of ancient, we've got to start looking at resetting that. Now, Doug, to follow up and carry this process all the way forward, we started at the piece that belonged the least, right? And that is what started the waterfall of selection after that. And we're just going to follow that all the way down the river, okay? Do we have any questions online, Kendall?
They're just mesmerized.
Mesmerized, tight. Okay, let's keep going because we gotta create. We need to do some magic here, right? What do we think about? Where my aluminum tag? This piece right here, right here. I feel okay about that. I can do that. Okay, we'll keep the aluminum tag, but we'll get rid of this piece. Okay, all right. And what do we think about this piece right here? Do we need to look at this piece right here before we remove this piece right here? What about this? It's awkward, right? It's awkward, and it gives us this big bowl shape. So for those online, I'm this guy right here. What do we think about that? And if we remove that, what is going to happen there? Well, let's make some decisions first. Can you see it from the front? Huh? Let me just touch this. Yeah, so the front for you is right in there. Option B would be here. This whole piece. You like the top option? So we're saying here. You can see this moving, yeah? You're going to have a lot of negative states. It's going to reduce the visual mass. We're going feminine here, right? We go feminine, we take away the visual mass. Visual mass is heavy. Visual mass is masculine. We want to go feminine, we reduce visual mass. Is this length okay over here? Okay, that's not a loaded question either, right? That's a genuine question. Is this okay? We have interesting features, interesting form, age on this. It's going to be tough to gin this and cut this off. If we don't need it, we got to do it, though. It's not about preserving what looks old. It's about making it look old. You think we could take this off? So if we take this off, we got to keep this. If we take this off, we got to keep this. Because otherwise, then we've stripped off 3/4 of the upper portion of the tree, and we no longer have a tree. Okay? I'm going to come back to you guys. This one. Okay, for everybody online, this one or this one? All right, here we go. Shaboom. Brace yourselves. It's going to get a little wild here. Oh. Ah. Oh. Randomness of nature. All right. Holy smokes, so much better. Now, this doesn't come without adjusting all of this and reforming the shape, right? Let's just be very clear about that, right? But there's an interesting line to be had in here. There's an interesting piece of deadwood that's been created, okay? There's an interesting line. There's also some interesting features in here. So let me ask you guys, do you guys want to see that? For example, if I take this out, do you want to see that line? You want to see that line? You guys want to see that? Everybody? This is one of the most unanimous. Yeah. I have no choice. I have no choice. No choice. Okay. So now I come back to this, and now this looks very, very heavy. Okay, now this is a difficult area here when we start to look at this. When we're looking in this area right here, right here. Do we reduce this? Do we keep? It's too heavy. What do we take away? Okay. I've got this guy coming across right here. Okay, I've got this guy right here. I'm just going to rotate this, and I'm going to keep. Okay, I'm going to keep wiggling this as you guys see the front. Try to think about what happens without that. You see the line. You see the line. Now, there's an interesting thing that happens here, because if we take this off, do we create some degree of discontinuity for this foliage mass right here? Do we? No, you think we're okay, Roger? There's too much of a gap. So do we feel it feels like a separate tree almost? Is that what you're looking at, Theo? Yeah? Perceptive kid. Perceptive kid. Yeah, I got a 4-year-old too, and I hear you. Good parenting. Oh, we're just getting started. We're just getting started. Okay. I'm just going to rotate this. Just an immediate impression. Is it looking older or younger? Ha ha! Victory, right? This is what we're trying to do. Yes. Okay. What about down here now? Because check this out. Now that we've got these where these were being tucked into different places, we can absolutely reorganize this foliage mass and redistribute. Now, we don't want to cover up the same lines that we just opened up, right? But we do want to now expand, increase photosynthetic efficiency of the foliage masses we've left behind, because we still have to accumulate sugars and starches. We still have to produce buds next season. We still have a tree that has to continue growing, okay? What do you got, Scott?
So I'm looking at the bottom section there, and it definitely looks heavier, but my question is, on a cascade design like this, how do you terminate that visually to stop the movement of your eye downward and get it to flow back up? And that it seems like part of that's tied in with how long you actually want that, because it seems to me you want as much length in that design. It doesn't seem like you want to shorten it.
Well, let me ask you guys this. I think that's a totally legitimate point, right? Let me ask you guys this. How long do we want it? Is it too long? No? You like the length? If you want it feminine, extend the design. How dare you throw that at me? How dare you throw my own... Right? This has always been a conundrum with this tree, right? What would be old? Would you have this little delicate, dainty, hanging branch down there? Maybe, right? Your chances of survival on that, if you find that tree in the mountains and you're a collector of Yamadori, you're just like, I found it, right? The random branch with this long little tuft out here and this live vein and this dead wood, and you're just like, Chances are no, right? Chances are. But we're not taught. We can talk about random, and we can justify it that way. I do it all the time.
That one should put your hands on, right? That should go.
Wow. Wow. This one? This one? Just this one? No. This one? This one?
That's shading the one below it.
Okay, so hang on. I'm going to move it up. I'm going to move it up. You guys are pumping a lot of energy up here. Feeling it. Okay, I'm going to rotate this. So Greg is proposing this. I'm thinking, what about both of these? What about both of these? Yeah, both? Oh, interesting. We get more movement. The other one makes a straight line. We do have more. Let's think about quality here, okay? Better transition of taper from here to here than this one, which is quite coarse. This one's been kind of got a big gin here. We've got a nice swoop. We've got more ramification on this piece versus this piece. If I want to follow along and I want to be creating a more feminine design, this is the branch that would go in terms of decreasing visual weight. Now, Scott's saying we want to elongate the design. I think you're right. It's why we got to keep this. At some point, we've got to keep one of these pieces. So if we're going to follow, and I'm not going to make I'm not going to, what do you call that when you say something and do another? If I don't want to contradict myself, right, I got to keep that. You called me out on stage. I got no choice, right? So now I got to go here. Yeah. My dad was in town for like a week not so long ago, and we were down in the workshop, and there were students down there, and we were cutting a tree up like this, and he every snip, and then he just had to leave, and he said, "It reminds me of when you were 14 again." Which I thought was just utter quality. I was like, I love you, Dad. Amazing. Okay. I see one more area that is really driving me nuts, and this one could be the most wild of all, okay? We have this apex now that feels really overly generous, right? Overly generous. This area out here would be the least predictable. Ricardo, you see this? This area out here feels like the least predictable to remove. Personally, right? If I looked at this and I say, oh, you're going to cut one branch, yeah, you're going to cut the branch that creates the length that connects to that back piece of foliar mass. But think about this just for a minute. Just for a minute. Tell me what you think. It's okay? It's okay? I mean, okay, I can cut it, yeah. All right doesn't really give me the incentive to cut it off. Been working for 6 years on this, you know, I need like, yay, that's going to make a better tree, or nay, that is not the option. It's going to make a better tree? You just want to see what it's going to look like, don't you? You want to wire it down, close it down? Let's see what we got here. Holy moly, what are we going to do? What's he going to do? What's going to happen here? Sure, I got to do it. Oh, wait, hang on. Let me just be real certain about what I'm doing. Yeah, okay. Bye. Did you say bye? Bye. Bye. See ya. See you later. And this one too. Yeah. Oh. Okay, now I'm going to do it to you guys again, okay? And Doug, this is coming back to this process of when you remove one, you remove another, you remove another, you remove another. Now, we will reach a point where we say, looks pretty old, and I think we're done for the night, right? We're one branch away. We're one branch away. We're one branch away, okay? There's a very specific reason for that, okay? With that last removal, I've created a shear line in the apical region. You guys see this as I rotate this? Take a look at this. Okay, show everybody online. You guys see this here? Right? We don't want shear lines in design where we have this straight line to the foliage mass, okay? Not at all what we want. Right? You see that? Not good, okay? How do we break that up? Perfect. Beautiful. Thank you, guys. We're going to take this centerpiece out. We're going to go out. We're going to come in. We're going to go out again. This is going to give us exposure to this piece of deadwood in the back of the tree. Watch what happens when we do this. Just ruthless. No heart. Well, you got to get the tree this healthy to be able to do this, right? I grew everything that I'm cutting off. I have the right to. I'm just trying to put these, obviously we're going to have to rewire this whole thing. Okay, take a look at that. This feels proportionally better for the tree. Now it fits, right? Now we see the line. Now we see the feminine characteristics, the quality. We see the curvaceous movement as opposed to the angular movement that would be masculine. We see the thinness as opposed to the thickness. We've come back to asymmetry again in the design. We lost that symmetrical silhouette. We move out, we move in, we move back out. We have random, which is a product of organic, natural design in trees and the environment. Now, there could be some other pieces. For example, I could see this getting shorter, right? I saved this. I started pruning here, and I was like, oh, actually, I might need that one, right? I could see this getting shorter. That could be, there's some places where we're going to come back in, we're going to sit down, we're going to make very thorough, thoughtful decisions based on this. I wanted to do this with you guys tonight, though, because it's a great season to do this, and now that I've done this, what does this mean for this tree from our fall physiology perspective based on what you've learned tonight? Might need to protect this winter, even though it's a spruce. Maybe this reduction of foliage mass, which if we accumulated all of this, right, this reduction of foliage mass could potentially impair its cold tolerance, right? What else do we have to worry about in the Pacific Northwest or other wet regions of the world when we remove this much foliage mass? Balance of water and oxygen has now been changed. We're not moving as much water out of the container because we don't have as much foliage mass transpiring. So now our water requirements are also going to need a quick tweak. And sometimes in wetter areas, it's not the cold but the wet that causes a major foliar reduction in the fall to fail over the winter season. Okay? Got another question in the back. I'm going to wrap this up with a few more gems. How are we doing on time?
Got about 10 minutes.
10 minutes.
12 minutes.
12 minutes.
Jim's wondering if the front has the potential to change now.
Could, Jim. It could. If we sit down and we really look at this, the front could shift. It's tough to find a stable base, get the deadwood that you want, see the flow and all the lines in one single go. That's where the front felt like, but we may need to adjust that. What do you got, Doug?
With the consideration that there's less water, obviously that would affect the fertilizing pattern as well.
Yep.
I'm assuming that it would need quite a bit of fertilizer for next spring, but at the same time, with the salts not being broken down, when you were talking about there not being enough water in the system to break down the stuff and burning the roots, is that something that's a consideration as well?
So I don't think that we're worried about salt accumulation in this tree at this point in time. But the question of how do we fertilize this tree now? Is this tree a tree in development? No. This tree is in refinement. What have we effectively done to the amount of vascular tissue this tree is going to create from this point moving forward? We've reduced it. We've reduced the amount of vascular tissue. If we've reduced the amount of vascular tissue production and we've reduced the amount of sugars and starches that are stored in the cells, what can we anticipate for next spring's bud push? Stronger or weaker? Weaker or smaller, right? Finer. So this action actually helps us achieve a finer amount of growth next spring, as long as we don't override that by excessively fertilizing, right? And so this is the last example of foliar mass being used as a gas pedal. Maybe need to take extra precautions for winter hardiness, which we've clearly jeopardized, but we can anticipate a finer and finer growth as we manage the foliage mass and the fertilizer appropriately based on the understanding of fall physiology, right? You guys have a massive new shelf in your toolbox, okay? Any other questions online that we need to get to before?
I see some hands in the
See some
crowd.
hands in the back. So just for everybody online, impromptu Q&A Thursday at 4 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. Any questions that don't get answered tonight, we will be answering at the impromptu Q&A Thursday, 4 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. After we've answered all of the live questions, we'll come back and address these. Any of you guys that want to see the questions asked online, Tier 3, you can come back, you can see the Q&A, you can see all the questions and accumulate all the knowledge. It's all time-stamped as well. Alan, what do you got?
Question on the juniper. It is my understanding that we would take the tips out of the juniper at this time of year also.
Why?
Because I was told to do that.
Oh, no. Oh, no.
It supposedly spreads out the growth and makes it for balancing the foliage.
Yeah. So would we take the tips out of the juniper? What do you guys know you need to ask before you do anything at this time of the year? What are you trying to accomplish, Alan? Do you want elongation, expansion, thickening, strength, foliar development? Then we don't want to take those tips out. If we want distribution, if we want reduction, if we want refinement, then taking those tips out would make sense, right? And so it all hinges on, we have a juniper, so in the fall we do this. No. We have a juniper in the fall, what are we trying to accomplish? Right? We got a spruce in the fall, what are we trying to accomplish? Right? We have a Zelkova in the fall, what are we trying to accomplish? That single question educates you guys, and now you have the physiology to answer your own question. What am I trying to accomplish? How is this tree behaving? This is what's happening, and this is how I get it done, okay? Peace up. You guys are awesome. Thank you so much. Very much appreciate being out there.